Hello, and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to a new video. I can't believe that we're already at this point, but we're at the end of our time in Montreal. We're leaving in 2 days' time, I think. So I thought it might be nice to do a similar video to the one that I did at the end of our experience living in Berlin, talking about what it's been like here, answering some of your questions, and I guess this time actually comparing it to our experience in Berlin, seeing if there's any differences, which I preferred. If this is your first time tuning into my channel, or maybe the first time for a while and you have no idea why I'm in Canada or why I was in Berlin, then for a little context, since graduating this summer, my boyfriend and I have actually been slow traveling. So we've been moving to different locations, but staying there for between 1 and 3 months. So we spent 3 months in Berlin from August till October, and then we've spent the whole month of November in Montreal, but then we're moving on from Montreal after this month. We're not staying any longer than that. And I did get a few questions asking, does that really count as living somewhere if you've only been there for a month? And I think that's a very valid question. And I agree, it definitely doesn't feel like we've lived here. It's felt much more like a holiday, which is something I'll get into later in the video. So no, we didn't really live here, I guess. To be quite honest, the reason I use that word is because I don't really know what else to call it, because we're not traveling per se, because we're paying rent while we're in these places. We're not paying rent elsewhere. So it's this weird in between of being a holiday and living somewhere. So if anyone could come up with a better name for it than that, then please let me know. The two that I alternate with is slow traveling and living somewhere, and I just use whichever depending on the context, I guess, that I'm talking about. But anyway, let's get into the first question. I thought a good one to start with would be, why did you choose to move to Montreal? And my answer to this is similar to the answer that I had for Berlin, I guess. I think when people ask this question, they expect me to have this really elaborate reason for why I've moved somewhere. And the honest answer is I don't really have neither an elaborate answer nor really any answer at all, because the reason we chose Montreal is purely because we'd obviously been in Berlin for 3 months and just fancied going somewhere other than Europe, fancied experiencing a different kind of culture, I guess. And we ended up coming to Montreal because we've been to Canada before. We went to Vancouver and Whistler, and Calgary actually, so more of the west kind of side. Not this summer, but the summer before, and really enjoyed our time there. And I also had a friend, one of my close friends that I met in Copenhagen, who did a semester abroad here, and she loved it. She did a semester abroad in Montreal. For clarification, I'm talking about so many places at once here. So yeah, she really enjoyed her time here. And she also had a family friend through which she'd found accommodation because they own some apartment blocks here, which in total honesty was a big reason why we came here, because through her, we essentially got a referral for the apartment that we're now living in. So it really, really simplified the whole process of finding accommodation. And that can be one of the trickiest parts of this slow travel process, finding somewhere to live, because we're obviously looking for only short-term rentals, and not everywhere, allows for short-term rentals. So the fact that we could find this place and be allowed to stay here for only 1 month was one of the main reasons why we picked it. And yeah, we've really lucked out with this place because it's a lovely apartment and it's in an amazing location. It's super, super central. And that's made a massive difference to our experience here, which I'll also kind of expand on a bit later in this video. Talking of finding accommodation, I also wanted to mention that this video is very kindly in partnership with Unite Students. And I'm sure if you're a university student, I don't need to explain who Unite Students are. They're the leading provider of student accommodation in the UK, providing homes to over 70,000 students in 23 cities. And they really understand the importance of the location of your accommodation, and that's why they make sure that all of their accommodation is in the best locations possible. They've also thought of pretty much everything else you need to think about too for your accommodation. They have studio or shared flats available depending on your preference. They have communal spaces in all of their accommodations, which is so important for the social element of your experience. They also have staff on hand 24/7 if you ever need anything. And importantly, all of the bills are included in the fixed rent price with no rising energy costs. As well as, of course, booking on your own, Unite Students also offers the option of booking as a group. So if you're nearing the end of your first year of university, for example, and you found a really great group of friends and you want to live with them in your second year, or vice versa, if you're in your second year going into your third year, then you can be assured that you can go through that process of finding somewhere with Unite Students together. I know it seems quite early to be talking about where you're going to be living in the next academic year, but it's one of those things where the earlier you sort it, the earlier you're just going to have another thing ticked off your to-do list, and you can be secure in the knowledge that your accommodation is going to be ready and waiting for you in the next academic year. So I'll leave a link down below in my description to Unite Students. You can have a browse of all of their accommodation and get booking for the next academic year. Okay, let's delve into how the experience in Montreal has differed to the experience in Berlin. The obvious thing is obviously the fact that we are here for 1 month as opposed to 3 months, and that made a big difference to our experience. As I mentioned earlier, Montreal has felt much more like a holiday in the sense that we've been trying to fit a lot more into a smaller space of time, and a month really isn't long enough, I think, to truly feel settled in a place. So I never really got a routine going here, and yeah, I guess it's just differed in that way because I'm not really sad to be leaving Montreal. I've really enjoyed our time here, and I think it's a great place. But I think because I didn't form the same attachment to it as I did to Berlin, I don't feel the same sadness that we're leaving, I guess. Although saying that, I think we're both leaving feeling as though we've seen everything that we wanted to see in Montreal. I think the only thing more we would have done if we'd stayed for longer is we would have done more trips to places nearby. So last weekend we actually went to Toronto and Niagara Falls, which was really nice to obviously see some of the places while we're here as well. And I think if we'd stayed longer than a month, we would have done more trips like that, because I know there's some really lovely areas outside of Montreal. I think the location of where we live in Montreal has also made a massive difference to our experience, because here we live so central. Like, I can't even emphasize how central we live. The main street is literally just outside the window over there, and I have never lived anywhere as central as that. In Nottingham and Leeds, I always lived close to the city centre, but still like a good kind of 20-minute bus ride out of it. In Berlin, we were honestly quite far out of the centre. It took, in total, a good half an hour to 45 minutes to get in. Here, we are just in the centre. And that's been really interesting because there's elements of it that I really like. It's obviously very, very convenient. There's cafes just outside, supermarkets just down the road. We've got everything that we could ever want right on our doorstep, which is incredible. But it also is very loud and it feels very open, like there's not a lot of privacy. For example, we've got huge windows in our apartment, which is obviously great for the light, and it's just lovely to have windows. But we are looking directly into offices, a library, other people's flats, and they'll all be looking straight into our apartment as well, which I really don't like. I feel like I'm living in a bit of a fishbowl and that I don't really have a lot of privacy in my own apartment. And obviously that's not really anything to do with Montreal, that's to do with our choice of apartment. I should have thought about that when I saw the photos and saw the location. But in that sense, I'm glad that we're here for no more than a month. I think if we were here for a month, I would actually consider moving just because of that aspect of it. So I think the more that we do this and the more that we have this amazing opportunity to slow travel, the more we're learning about our personal preferences for the kind of way in which we like to live, I guess. I think we've established now that living super central somewhere isn't the best thing for us, especially because we both enjoy running, we both enjoy getting out into green spaces, and you don't really have that here. I would actually say that Montreal isn't a very green city in comparison to Berlin or other European cities or even UK cities that I've lived in. And I think I really miss that element of those cities. I miss, the parks and being able to go just on a walk to somewhere open and green. There are places like that here. You've got Montreal, which is a big sort of outdoor space, but it's a good sort of half an hour to get to walking through the city before you then actually walk up to it itself, because it's quite a big hill basically. Or you've got the canal in that direction, but once again, it's quite a commute to get there before you can then walk around or run around that area. I haven't been to many other North American cities, so it's difficult for me to compare, but from what I've heard, this area that we live in, the downtown area, is very kind of typically North American. There's high-rise buildings, lots of blocks, it's a block structure to the streets. It's quite busy and noisy here. But Montreal is interesting actually, because you can walk half an hour sort of that way and you'll get to areas like Old Montreal, which feel very European, and that's obviously because of the history of the place and the colonization that took place. That's why it's got such, I guess, a European influence to its architecture and its design. But yeah, I think it's just a very interesting place in that sense. Even though it's got those resemblances to Europe, I think there are still quite a few cultural differences, obviously, good and bad ones. And one of the good ones that I've noticed, just thinking off the top of my head, is I think people are really friendly here. For example, in our apartment block, if you're in the lift with someone, they will always say hello to you, ask how you are, say goodbye to you when they exit the lift or you exit the lift. And there's just these small day-to-day interactions, I think, that we don't really tend to have, at least in the UK. I feel like if you're in a lift, for example, in the UK, you're standing there in dead silence. You're not really ever going to talk to the person that's next to you. Also, I've noticed a good few times now, if I'm ordering a coffee somewhere, for example, the servers are normally really lovely. There was this server the other day, I was at a cafe and I was genuinely taken aback by how friendly and outgoing she was. Like, it really, I don't know why it shocked me, because obviously it's such a nice thing, but I think I'm just not used to people being that friendly, I guess, to total strangers. In general as well, I've noticed that Canadians are really enthusiastic about the fact that we're here. For example, I've had a few TikToks and Reels that have kind of blown up a bit since we've been here and clearly landed on a lot of Canadians' algorithms. And I have been flooded with recommendations on what to do and how to get the true, authentic experience of living here. And, you know, they're excited about the fact that we're here and we're experiencing their culture. And I'd say that's quite different to what we experienced in Berlin. Not that Berlin wasn't welcoming, but I think there are certain elements of their culture, I guess, in Berlin that they want to keep quite private. They don't really want to allow tourists into, for example, things like the clubbing scene. I talked about this in my Berlin video. You know, there's kind of the clubs for Berliners and then there's the clubs for the tourists. And not that we've been clubbing here and not that that's really relevant to anything, but, you know, just in principle, I guess, I found the culture much more welcoming here, I guess, than it was in places like Berlin. And, you know, that once again could be completely unique to our experience in those places. And Berlin is quite different culturally in that regard. But, you know, we just got a really warm welcome here, I think. I thought this was an interesting question and it really made me reflect. And it's, did Berlin prepare you in any way for Montreal? And when I thought about it, I think it really has, because Berlin taught me that when I arrive in these new places that we're slow traveling to, I just need to kind of jump in the deep end and start doing things straight away, basically. Because when we arrived in Berlin, I'd say I spent a good month trying to get into a routine and trying to settle in that way. And I think because I was focusing on that so much, I was missing the sort of beauty of what we're doing and missing making the most out of the incredibly fortunate position that we're in the sense that, you know, we have this flexibility and freedom. And by trying to nail down like a routine as soon as I get to these places, I'm stripping that freedom away from myself in a way. So I think when I arrived in Montreal, my priorities were just slightly different because of that. I was still keen on finding things that are important to my routine, like, you know, fitness classes and good co-working spaces, but I was also much more on it in terms of finding friends quickly and getting out there and getting to these places that people had recommended and, you know, actually enjoying my time here. So I think just overall, the more that we're doing this, the more I'm learning about my work-life balance, I guess. Another popular question was, how has the language situation been? Because in Montreal and Quebec in general, French is, of course, a very prominent language, although Canadian French is very different. I did French at GCSE, so I was kind of hoping when I came here that some of that would be revived and I would have a better chance, I guess, of understanding French here than I did understanding German in Berlin. But that has not been the case at all, because even though I did study French, the French here just sounds so different that it takes me kind of double the amount of time to even attempt to understand what they've just said to me. However, from my experience and observation, I would say that it's pretty 50-50 here actually between French and English. So if you go to order or are just spoken to, I guess, in any kind of situation like that, it's a pretty 50-50 chance of whether they're going to speak English or French to you. And if they do speak French, I've never really had a problem reverting to English. We've always been able to get by in some way because it is so commonly spoken here. And I think because it is more 50-50 here language-wise, it's made it easier to make friends with people that are from Montreal or live in Montreal, just because they're so used to speaking English, I guess, that it doesn't create any sort of dynamic in the friendship. I don't know if this is making any sense or not, but I guess it doesn't feel for them as they're going out of their way to speak English to you. And on the flip side, it doesn't make us feel, I guess, like an inconvenience, the fact that we don't speak French. Like, there's always this middle ground, I guess, that you can find. Is it expensive compared to the UK or Berlin or other places that you've lived? So I'm pretty sure the monthly rent that we pay here is the same as the rent that we paid in Berlin, but we're in a much better location here than we were in Berlin. And once again, it is so much cheaper than we would have been able to find in places like London, for example, for the kind of apartment that we have and for the location of the apartment. If we were this central in London, I don't even know how much it would have cost, but, you know, definitely not in the same price range as what we pay here. Aside from rent, I do think Montreal is an expensive place to live, and I've commented on this before on my social media, and people have said that this is sort of reflective of Canada as a whole. It's not necessarily just Montreal, but things like groceries, for example, feel very, very expensive here. Sometimes it genuinely feels cheaper to eat out than it does to actually go and buy the ingredients to make a meal at home, which is ridiculous, but I think that's why so many people do eat out so much in Montreal and Canada, which is another interesting cultural difference, I think, because although in Europe, and I keep saying Europe so generally in this video, of course I know every European country has its differences, but I think the eating out culture and the restaurant culture is very different than it is here. Here, it's very normal to have one or multiple of your meals out every day, whether that's actually sitting down in the restaurant, taking it away, or having it on the go, whatever. And I don't know if this is maybe just because of the way that I was brought up. And, you know, when I was growing up, eating out was only for like a special occasion, not an everyday thing at all, not even a weekly thing, sometimes not even a monthly thing. Like, it was very much just birthdays, special occasions. So I don't know if maybe that's why it feels a little bit strange to me that cooking at home just doesn't seem to be that big of a thing here. But yeah, that was just sort of an observation that I made. Although saying that, you know, it seemed as though people also ate out all the time in Berlin as well. But I think it was cheaper to eat out in Berlin than it was to eat out here. And I think one of the reasons for that is because the price of something that you see in Canada is never the actual price of it, because then when you go to check out or pay your bill or whatever, you've got, I think, added together almost 15% sales tax on top of the original price. And there's it's broken down into two different taxes. I really don't know that much about it, so take everything I'm saying with a pinch of salt. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 15% sales tax. And then on top of that, if you're eating in at a restaurant, for example, you're also expected to pay between 15 and 20% tip, depending on kind of the quality of the service, I guess. So, you know, something is maybe $15 face value, but you're going to end up spending more like $20+ once you add all the tax and tip and everything like that on, which I think makes it feel expensive here. Okay, the final question is, where are you moving to next? So on Thursday this week, we are actually flying from Montreal to Seattle because in December, we've got 3 weeks or so of just normal travel, I guess. So not really slow travel. We're just traveling to see friends and to see new places before we then return to the UK for Christmas. So yeah, we're flying from Montreal to Seattle firstly, and we're going to be spending 3 or 4 nights in Seattle. We're staying at my friend's uncle's house there. And yeah, so that should be really good. And then we're flying with that friend and our other friends that we're meeting there to Hawaii, which is where they live. We're staying in Hawaii for, I think, just under 2 weeks, around 2 weeks. And then on our way back from Hawaii to London, we're stopping over in LA and spending, I think, 3 nights in LA. So yeah, I'm super excited to be going to all of those places and traveling around a bit faster, I guess. And then in January, we are stopping again, so slowing it down, doing the slow travel again. And we're actually going to be in Sydney, Australia, from January to March next year. And after that, we have no plans. So we could end up spending longer in Australia. We're not sure yet, but for definite, we're going to be in Australia in January. So on that note, I'm going to end this video here. I hope you enjoyed hearing about my experience in Montreal and the differences and the similarities that I've observed. Make sure to subscribe and stick around for our travels in December, our move to Australia. Also go and follow me on Instagram and TikTok because I post lots of more vlog style content over on there now, and I'm sure I'm going to be documenting all of that there, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!